Namaste and in catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as predictable as I am, Namaste comes from the Hindu. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. Spoken, it's actually the Brahmi language. And in catch comes from the Mayan culture, and it means I am another you. So imagine if you hold that attitude inside when you greet others, the change that it can make in your own life, their life, and rippling out into the world. Try it, find out. I challenge you. Cool. All right. So this week's episode, we've got Dr. Laura Staley, and I know she's a little reluctant to call herself doctor, and yet she is. So she's passionately supporting people who want to thrive. And she has a company called the Cherish World, which she works with people as both an interior and exterior designer to free their clutter and make their space more available to their own personal growth and achievement in life. She's a featured columnist and contributing author for Biz Catalyst 360, which is how we met initially. She's also a columnist for Owl Magazine. She has a doctorate in philosophy, actually, from Ohio State University. And interestingly enough, she's also got an MA in political science and government. So imagine those things, as well as a degree in Feng Shui and the practices of Feng Shui. And if you're familiar with that, it's how you arrange stuff to make things work the best, right? So with that, I'm just going to bring her on. It's going to be a great conversation. Paula, so glad to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be with you,
Paula, Laura.
That's okay, Laura, that's okay. We're going to write the letters, take out the P, and you got my name. It's all good.
Well, my sister's name's Laura, too. So that was like, where did that come from?
All is well.
Oh, start out with a faux pas. Let's see where this goes.
Right, it's okay. It's, well, here's what's so great, Zen, is we're not our names. The truth is we're not our names, we're not our stuff, we're not our degrees, we're the people, the energy beings in our hearts and in our souls and in our spirits. So all is well. Just, what do they say? Just don't call me late for dinner.
And wherever you are,
right?
There I am too.
Exactly. That's right.
So, we have such a wonderful opportunity in these times to learn and grow together. And that's really the purpose for these episodes, is develop these conversations that matter and talk about the inner development and how it reflects in the outer world, and to really kind of raise the bar for our human experience, provided we invite people in to do so as well. So in your early life, I know you already to be a very deep person, and that has to start with some development as a youth. So what kinds of things happened to you early on that let you know that there was more to life than just the physical experience? There was an inner side.
Oh, I think I learned that very early, honestly, because I had a very difficult, traumatic childhood inside my parents' house and outside of my parents' house, with adults and with children. And I very quickly discovered this inner world and the world of books. So reading, and I now know that was a very healthy way to dissociate.
And some would call it coping strategies, but I think that's a misnomer.
And yet, it's like, oh gosh, sometimes we have negative associations with certain terminology, and I realized no, that was a pathway in, because the stories that I would read in books would enliven my imagination.
Mm-hmm.
I did have lifeline people, thank goodness, who unconditionally love me. My grandma Hope comes to mind. My dad, as best he could, but he was part of a pretty unhealthy system.
Did I hear your grandma Hope?
Grandma Hope. Yeah.
Oh,
Isn't that so
what a wonderful
fantastic?
name.
I know.
Great.
I did, and know that
That's
I
a
did.
setup.
I know, right? I didn't call her at the time, but since she passed years ago, I absolutely have just like renamed her. And then the natural world, because of the, I noticed that anytime I was in the natural world, my imagination and my inner world would absolutely come alive. And part of what I was attempting to do is understand what the heck was going on, right? I was trying to understand how to be a really good little girl, so my mother would love me and stop raging at me, and or being cruel, or kind of doing all the different things that happened, because there was kind of what the way to describe it was a kind of I hate you, don't leave me. We could but it's an experience that's really brutal for a child. But
Absolutely.
I also witnessed my mother being very loving to my brother, very loving to my sister. At times she was unkind to everybody because she was just having a meltdown, right? But mostly, and then out in the
You just
world,
wasn't happy inside.
oh my gosh, right? But out in the world, she was very buttoned up, and that happy, polite, say thank you, pow, and curtsy. And so I was just like mystified by this shape-shifting human being who happened to be my mother, and then all the characters that I encountered, and how sometimes they occurred like kind, and then the next moment they would not be kind. And wow. And of course, maybe it was just my inner essence, came in with such kindness. Now there's the Enneagram and the disc and all those kinds of things, but I'm like, wow, this supporter, huge heart, the helper, and the Enneagram, the enthusiast. It's like I'm a melding of peacemaker, maybe,
Right,
I'm like this
right.
melding of all kinds of things. But it was in those experiences that frankly, Zen, I had to go inside. Because it was so terrifying and traumatizing, that I quickly discovered that my soul was a place to connect to, where I felt, even as my body was just
Mhm.
I began to connect with the soul of me. I don't think I saw it at that time, but I can, from the perspective now, I can look back and go, oh, that's what I was doing,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah,
there would
yeah.
be a grain of calm and comfort in that inner world. Or when I laid down on the earth, outside across the street, where all these gorgeous trees were, and I would hold on to what ended up being a horse chestnut. For years, I thought I was collecting buckeyes, right? Because I
Right, right,
grew up
right.
in Ohio, and Buckeye Nation and all of that. And I remember holding, and opening the spiny, shell of the nut, and feeling the prickles of that on my hand, but then opening up, and there would be this smooth skin of the shell itself, the nut shell, and then this gorgeous, kind of reddish, brownish, with the little tan spot on it. And I would hold that, and it just felt, it was like a sacred moment, and I knew the nut would never yell at me, right? The
Right.
grass would not hurt my body. You could just like quickly learn that the trees might even talk to you a little bit in a comforting way. And I know one might say, well, that's the imagination of a child. Yes. And thank goodness. And then
Well, what do you think about the
all the
science behind
animals,
that?
all the
The
animals.
because now we understand that, we're only 1% matter. And so there's this space, and everything is alive. It has energy, it has vibration, and that in nature, there's no judgment.
No.
It's simply what is. So it
Yeah.
kind of makes sense how being in that place just edifies our own inner being, and the non-judgment place of loving us, because nature loves us whether we no matter what, even when we destroy it, it doesn't know any better, right? It's just love, right?
Yes.
And so that is that a potential that maybe, now that we're understanding things a little bit more, that's actually what's happening, that there's some science involved there. And I also wonder, and I'm curious, how do you think about it, the situation of choosing where we end up in our childhood in order to have the experiences that we need to evolve. Do you consider that to be a kind of a reality based on what you've found to be true for you?
Wow. Oh, that's such a brilliant, beautiful question. Well, first, to the point about everything has energy and everything is alive with energy, that is the first principle of the ancient wisdom of Feng Shui. So, being trained in that wisdom, and of course, it's about harmony and balance inside and in the natural world and with one another, right? That's kind of like the optimal comfort.
Robert Gilman says it's harmony with self, others, and nature.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, and it's that the wholeness of all of that. So, so everything is alive with qi is how we would express it in the ancient wisdom of Feng Shui, and everything is changing and everything is connected, right? So those are the three main principles in Feng Shui. So I will absolutely underscore what you said. And I think we have a richer understanding of that now, from not just from anecdotal, but understanding quantum physics. And not that I'm not a quantum physicist, but I've watched and been intrigued by those movies and the readings and even things about water, right? How our bodies are made mostly of water. Right. And it's just like, oh my gosh. Right.
Yeah.
And, and yet there's this energy that animates us, just like that moment of holding the buckeye nut, or the horse chestnut. Sorry. I thought it was a buckeye, but learned that later it wasn't.
A horse by any other name.
Right. Exactly. And then, wow, I'm trying to remember now your second question, which was so profound and meaningful. About my childhood experiences, kind of
being chosen in order to help you evolve,
to
being you are.
Kind of almost choosing that. Like, I remember Dr. Wayne Dyer talking about you chose your parents, on the other side or wherever we are before we're birthed into this world. And I found myself so intrigued by that. Actually, there's a passage, the first prose piece in my latest book, Abundant Heart, talks about being impulsive as a soul in heaven. And even though they were like, okay, no, really, seriously, this is a hard assignment. This is super challenging. And I'm like, ooh, me.
Sure,
I'm like this soul go, pick me, And then of course I get here and it's like, whoa, they weren't joking.
Right.
But I also know that it's been a beautiful path, because it's allowed, honestly, I think it's allowed me to be here at the perfect time in the perfect way, in service, in love and service to other human beings, because I had that. Really, I would not wish it on anyone. Please, like,
we never do,
oh my
but
gosh,
we seem
right?
to choose it anyway.
Right. I mean, please, may we as a culture raise children in very, very different ways than the way I was interacted with. My greatest wish for our planet, among many other wishes, but that's a big one. But it became the grist, if you will. It became the grit that allowed me to continue to become an alchemist for my life, and to cultivate the contents of my character. I love Dr. King Jr.'s words, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, to be judged on the content of my character. Well, that's inside of us. And that's how that energy inside of us, if we have, a heartful, how does he say it? Anyone can serve, right? If you have a heart filled with grace and a soul generated by love, right? You don't need a PhD. I happen to have one, but you don't need a PhD in order to serve. If you've got a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love, I mean, who doesn't want that, right? And then I would hear, the stories from different faith traditions, right? I remember being intrigued by that. And I was like, wow, they're all about love. Islam, love. Judaism, love, and kind deeds,
And they all have a trinity involved,
right? And then Christianity, the stories of Jesus, love, and then you branch out from there. And even I would even argue that agnostics and atheists, in their direct experiences of life, love is in everything, right? It's in the energy field.
We've tried to,
right?
At least it appears that we've tried to exercise our brains to identify everything, right? We've approached life from a very left brain, chronological, structural, hierarchical, silo-ish kind of way. And yet this right brain, it's like Tom Campbell talks about explaining the right brain world to a left brain thinker. And it's almost impossible to do because it's experiential.
Yes. It's absolutely. I mean, even I think it's the Dalai Lama or Buddha, right? The encouragement was, don't just hear my words and trust my words. Go out and have direct experiences. So to your point, Zen, it's like your direct experiences of being resentful or being hurt, or the sadness that you have felt in different experiences in your life. My experience of feeling terrified all the time, my experience of having an adult in my tiny little body, it was called annihilating rage. I mean, wow, talk about something that you think is going to take you out.
Why in the world would you want that for someone else too? So that natural place in us, I think, that's free of that, that pain, that suffering, why would we want to inflict that on others? And yet we often practice what we learn until we can establish that just doesn't feel right. Right.
Exactly.
We may think that it's okay because it's the reaction that we have, and by gosh, they deserve it. Right. Well, do you deserve it? If I'm another you, would you treat yourself that way? Right. And sometimes we do, because that's how we grow up and that's what we're taught. And then we have to break out of that shell. Now, how did you work through that? You had this, let's say, a horrific childhood in some respects. What process did you go through in your later years, your teens, your early 20s, to kind of grapple with that and see it from a different place?
So at 14, so at 7, I had that first spiritual awakening that I looked in the mirror and I saw myself and said, wow, I'm going to remember this moment. We're getting out of here. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, that kind of thing. And then at 14.
But it was that inner voice that came through to you.
Yes.
Out of nowhere, right?
Yes.
And just simply through your own eyes said, you're going to get out of here. I'll be with you.
Yeah. And I'll be with you. Oh, absolutely. Well, and it felt the energy of it felt so loving. And I, it created an anchor inside. And then at 14, a number of events transpired, including witnessing the rape of my tent mate. And then as best as I put the pieces together based on all the paper trail that I just received a couple years ago when they cleared out my parents' house, that I was drugged because I told the truth. And, because the girl who was impacted was just terrified. I mean, I will never forget her face and the round saucer eyes. And because I bore witness to that, and I told, and they were like, nothing happened. You had a great time at camp. If this did happen, your counselor get fired, and do you want that to happen? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh man, this is just.
Why do you think that our tradition has been to brush things like that under the rug, the carpet, and dismissive of them, and just
It's so awful,
ignore it.
right? Yeah. Well, they,
That's trauma.
yeah,
We have a
it's more,
society full of trauma because of those kinds of things right now.
yeah. Because so it becomes less about what happened to this young girl that doesn't even get addressed, and then what happened to me in witnessing it, and more about how they protect their reputation and don't want to lose the money or their sense of control and righteousness. So yeah, and
Kind of like the big pharma control of the current condition that we're experiencing now.
I mean, it's a mess. Right. And so I would just say simply greed and a need to control, and an out of balance, dare I say, and I know some people struggle with this expression, but dare I say a toxic masculine energy, but more than that, because I don't, I would just call it greed and a desire to control. And that and then it becomes this protection thing of,
could it even be the fear of loss of control?
Yeah, absolutely. Like what would actually happen if the truth came to light and we shifted our energy around to healing this thing? And the same thing happens lots of different places, but I think there's a healing and shift that's because a lot of us.
I love the vagina monologues.
Oh, right? Because a lot of us women are now speaking out openly about the sexual molestation that we ourselves experienced, the rape I experienced at 19, and at 3, the sexual molestation. I was threatened with my life, and, if you tell, I'll kill you and all the members of your family. I'm like, wow, you just, so yeah, the perpetrations are real. But back to your question of how did I come through that? I think it was these awakenings. So I got hospitalized, and then I was put in solitary confinement because I got drugged at camp. That triggered me into a psychotic break. I know people don't understand that terminology. I like calling it a spiritual awakening, but I was clearly not in my body. I was out of my body, not in my body. So I'm in the hospital, and they're coming in, and I'm bare walls, no clothing. I'm in a thick gown. It's freezing. I have one blanket, this thin mattress, and 3 doors, one to freedom, one to the restraints, one to the bathroom. And this angry staff member comes in just about every day. There were kind ones, but they took my glasses, and I had myopia. And she just started asking these questions. And do you know why you're here? Well, being who I was, I took it as a philosophical question, like this deep question, like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I never bothered to answer her, because I figured, okay, she's the kind of person that whatever I said to
no matter what you say, it's not going to be.
It wasn't right. It wasn't going to go well. So I just went silently, and then went within and thought, no, I actually don't know why I've been placed in solitary confinement. I have no idea. I literally had no idea. They were medicating me. I had an awareness of that. Because orange juice just doesn't taste like that, But I started asking myself that very profound question: why are you here? Like, why are you on the planet? And I've continued to ask myself that question every single day. So then going forward, I went on a quest to find a faith community, because obviously I broke ties. I did my best to break ties with my church. I mean, I met with a minister afterwards, and he's like, wow, I just won't eat the chili. I happened to have chili for dinner that night, and I was explaining to him what had happened. And he laughed, and he's like, I guess I just won't have the chili. I mean, I told him the whole truth.
How dismissive.
It was completely dismissive. And I met in private with him, which is, again, so fascinating how all these things like happened, me and a grown adult, usually, unfortunately, a male, well, I mean, in the case of the staff member who came in and yelled at me every morning about, did I know why I was in there?
Right.
But I went on a spiritual quest. Honestly, I wanted to find a faith community where I felt safe and where I felt welcome. And honestly didn't discover one until just like 3 years ago. I finally had done enough healing, and they have 8 principles. It's not even about dogma. Atheists are welcome. Agnostics are welcome. They even have, I call them spiritual TED Talks, honestly.
Right.
You know, right? Like I told, I mean, he's called the minister, but I told him, I was like, it's a Unitarian Universalist. So for those who know you and have no understanding of it, it's okay. But there are 8 principles.
Been there numerous times.
Oh my God. And
great place.
Oh my God. They're principles that just, oh my God, these are principles that I've lived all my life. You know, the worth and dignity, to honor the worth and dignity of every human being, to see the interconnectedness of all of life. You know, I mean, actually there are 8 principles now, which includes an inclusion and anti-racist, you know, like let's bring all our people
it's
together.
like, you know,
but
why the heck do we need that? Why are we so thick-headed and so biased and prejudiced that we can't see ourselves in another?
I struck, well, fear. And back to greed and
there we go.
Back to greed and need to control.
But you even got the validation.
Back to greed and need to control. And right. I mean, I suppose there are other elements, because if I'm disconnected with my own heart and haven't done that inner work, then I'm going to stay I have to stay disconnected, because then everything's a threat.
Now, I'm going to get connected here for just a moment. I'm going to deepen this experience. It's going to be kind of weird, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right. So as soon as you said fear, and there was a ding from your computer or somewhere, because I heard it. And for me, my experience is that we are so interconnected. The electronic world is nothing more than consciousness that flowing through wires, right, or glass cable, depending, and the air. And it is so interconnected that when we begin experiencing this notion of quantum entanglement and unified field, these synchronicities present themselves to kind of dot the landscape with things to pay attention to a little more. Right? And that's what that little chime did for me when you said fear, because that's the basis for all, in my opinion, and from my experience, that's the basis for all of the resistance to becoming a unified humanity. It's just the fears, for whatever reason, and there's a litany of them, but they're really all excuses for denying yourself.
Right, which is really intriguing, because there's that expression, deny thyself, but that wasn't about not taking care of your inner world.
It's about changing the ego to we-go.
Right, exactly. Oh, I love that. I hadn't heard that. I love that. Yeah, well, and I used to think I had to fight and make my ego wrong, and what I've learned is I just get to feed my true self. So I'm a daily meditator for now since 2014, and we're 2021. And that has been a transformative practice. Getting still, getting quiet. And some people, if you don't want to call it meditation, do what, you know, unplug, just disconnect, take a walk in nature, you know, listen to the trees.
I have a little
have a multi-sensory experience of being alive. I've sometimes guided a client. Can you feel the socks on your feet? Like right now, right? Because it's like, if you can get yourself back in your body in a multi-sensory experience, and even maybe feel some thirst, or maybe a hunger, or maybe you need that bio break, right? That's a good thing, because there aren't just 5 senses then. There are 8, probably 9, maybe more, right? Because they're all—
I have a list of 15, but I really think,
right?
You know, most of the senses, the way we actually sense things, and this may sound a little weird again. So we have 5 senses with 10% of our brain. This is an accepted axiom. And so what's the other 90% doing? Could we, if you just do a simple ratio, then we've got 45 more senses. So, but are those just finer levels of the 5 we have, that it goes down into that deeper sensory experience? And one of the things I learned how to initiate that as a teen, trying to figure out, how to get out of my own mishigas, and I just found my fingertips pressed together one day, and I began to feel my heartbeat and my fingertips, and I just sat with that for a little bit. And it wasn't until years later that I brought the practice back around again. I thought, well, gosh, it's true that we can't think our way through a system built on vibration. We have to sense our way through it. And that's one of the easiest ways to get in your feeling world, to get into that sense, because you're out of your mind when you're feeling, right? You're just sensing. And then you can, develop that gut feeling, the intuition, and allow that to be more of a guide than living from your shoulders up and thinking that, oh, I got to do this because this is the way it's done, right? Or this is how I was told, or this is how mom did it, this is how dad did it, so I got to do it too, right? Instead of being a rebel and say, wait a minute, I got my own way.
Oh, absolutely. So how old were you when you discovered that you put your hands?
I was a teenager, doing a lot of psychotropics at the time.
Okay.
And so I was in a really bizarre place, kind of freaking out. And of course, if you've ever done anything like that, there's this really intense focus that becomes present, and you could obsess on a blade of grass for hours, right? Just loving it, right? And watching it and sensing it. Well, that's where I got to, where my head was in such a mess and thinking all kinds of different things. And of course, your own inner demons come up when you're in that space, and it gives you a chance to deal with it or not. In dealing with it, that's what came. I just kind of naturally fell into that position, and then realized, oh, I'm feeling my heartbeat. I started feeling my heartbeat, and I became aware of my breath, and I just sat in my breath and my heartbeat. I was like, wow, this feels so good, right? And that's the essence of meditation, is being in that silent place. And it seems when you can be in that place, then that voice of being that's inside of you can speak, because you're listening.
Yes, you're quiet enough. You're quiet in your belly, in your inner world. Well, and yoga practice also was a great, because it was, I had a fabulous teacher who has since passed, unfortunately. She was such a beautiful, loving soul, but she was such a beautiful guide right into the body. And I'll remember when she was even talking about our organs, right? And like sensing our liver and the heart. And it was the coolest experience for me, having already done a fair amount of sensing my inner world. And your earlier comment made me think of how, I believe it's the Eskimos have the 20 different words for snow. It's kind of like, wow, what if we had 45 different words to describe inner sensations? Because okay. I just haven't learned them yet.
Well, but you use them all the time.
Right. Well, because even in this moment, as we're in this communication, I'm very much aware of my feet and my legs. I happen to be standing. That's just my choice, because I feel like I think and interact better on my feet. I mean, we'll see.
If I stand, I move around way too much.
Oh, we'll see. There's that also. Yeah. Well, and when I taught at Ohio Wesleyan, I was like all over the place, and the hands were waving, and sure. But I have learned to kind of like, okay, it's a Zoom.
Don't put a podium on the stage for me, because I'll never go there.
Right. Oh, exactly. You'll be out, with the people, interacting with them. But yeah, the sensations of the body, and I think it's I think it's a pathway. It's a pathway to those transformations. Kind of back to your question of what were my through lines. Well, obviously time and nature was a through line.
Right.
These deep awakening moments of spiritual awakening, just being asked that question, even in anger, started that process for me. And then I began to notice my own behavior, and I put myself in transformational leadership trainings, and that word was not used way back then, and they would ask all kinds of intriguing, what does it mean to be a human being? And we have this fear thing, and we see the world is dangerous, and yet where does that come from? And and pulling it all apart, and then these mechanisms, right, these coping strategies, if you will, that we create inside ourselves in response and reactivity to other people. So if somebody says something and you make it mean that you're not worthy. Well, they didn't ever say you're not worthy, but they
Right.
said whatever they said, but then you attach this meaning to it, and then pulling apart the meanings that we keep attaching to
Right.
things,
And recognizing
and
the,
hearing what's actually being said,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
responding to what's actually being said. Yeah. And then
So how do
really,
you unpack
yeah.
that? Because there's faulty filters there, right? You-
Yes,
Your
yes.
listening
Oh my God.
is listing. Um,
Right? Oh.
and so again, how do you unpack that? What's a process? What's a practical process that you use to help unpack that when you're dealing with a situation that needs to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was an overtime practice that I even do today. I'll say this, that I'm less triggered today. I live in such a beautiful surrounding and a really loving relationship. And even then there's still things that come along. But well, first of all, is to to get quiet and sink into my body. And after so many painful, saying things that I didn't mean. And I know, for instance, I shared one with you in our conversation earlier of being
Mhm.
so upset with my at that juncture, my soon-to-be ex, that I said something very awful about him in front of my daughter, which was not my commitment. It was so out of line with my commitment, but I'll just use that one as an example. Well, I felt, I felt the sensations coming up inside of my body. So that's the first thing. But sometimes people aren't even aware of that. So they got to back it up and back it up and back it up, to, oh my God, to, kind of catch themselves in that,
Right.
moment. And then, hopefully have that awareness to go, wow, I'm in a moment. Can I pause? So going to neutral. And my favorite, and I stuck this on the refrigerator, my favorite Viktor Frankl quote is, between stimulus and response is a pause.
Yeah.
And in that pause is our power, to respond, and, well, is a response.
Yeah.
And our response guides us to our power and freedom. I know I'm butchering it a little bit, but the point is the pause, to take ourselves, like as soon as possible, that in my process, that I could recognize that I was like,
Right.
like a cartoon character, to just go freeze, and work to drop that, and take myself literally, put the tongue on the top of the roof of the mouth, soften my knees. If you're sitting, you can even do this. If you're at a conference table, or, well, maybe people aren't there right now on a Zoom call or something, and you notice all this, coming up, to, because neutral is actually it's a body posture that you can take yourself into.
Mm-hmm.
But
Very true.
if you put your tongue on the top of the roof of your mouth, it mimics what infants do when they're feeding. And when you're eating, your body usually is very calm. And so it sends a message, it it cues the brain that it's time for calm. So that begins to calm your nervous system, which is really good. But I also love the fact that when it's on the top of the roof of your mouth, Zen, you're not talking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're still in that silent pause. And in that neutral place, then how you respond can hopefully come from your deepest commitments. And of course, that's a process. What do you
And a
deeply,
practice. It's
and
a
a practice,
discipline.
and to identify,
Yeah.
well, because you have to identify what you deeply value. Like right now through the pandemic and everything, I'm hoping, my greatest hope, and I, because I've been doing this work for so many years, I've identified my deepest values. You know, love, compassion, courage being probably my top three, right? But there are more: creativity, wisdom, truth, full self-expression, right?
But the core right now, I think,
You know,
is compassion.
then yeah, exactly. And then to respond, and silence is a response.
Mm-hmm.
But to respond then from your deepest values. So in that interaction, so quickly being able to shift. Now it was too late because I had hurt my daughter. My words had been hurtful. And of course she reacted and fled my house, but I was able to apologize and feel the deep remorse, because that's part of the process too. Because when I miscue, I must feel that remorse, because the remorse is a rewire.
Some might call it repentance.
Remorse is a rewire, right? Because you have to feel it fully, like the deep regret that I said what I said, because she gets to have a loving, beautiful relationship with her dad, which she actually does to this day.
And body language, as much as anything, words are 7% of the necessary means of communication, right? The 5% body language, and the other is the tone.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what's said, but the tone in which it's said.
Exactly.
And when you're in that place and truly asking, apologizing and asking for forgiveness, you're in a very, I don't want to say submissive, but I guess that's one of the best words for it. That you're just honoring that, I screwed up, please forgive me. And that energy, how can you refuse that?
Well, exactly.
Right?
Now it took her a little while, but we got there. And I think another practice for me too, Zen, is to simply put my hands over my heart. Because when I do that, well, first of all, again, sort of like the tongue on the top of the mouth, it just absolutely calms me down, right? I just like, oh. Because I'm literally feeling the warmth of my hands, and then those hands over my heart. And for me, that's a reminder that I value love. And for me, the heart contains courage, and it contains love and just deep emotional intelligence and so much more. I mean, we probably could have a whole hour conversation about heart math.
Yeah. Heart math, the Heart Math Institute.
Right.
Right. So I want to kind of peer into the political science and government arena, and somewhat in business as well. How do you see that ability to hit the pause button being brought out in the meetings and the things where things get kind of tense and because we've both been in these types of situations where the energy just gets ramped up, people are frustrated, they're upset, they're not saying what they feel because they're trying to fix a problem rather than look at the cause of it first. And so the deepening of conversations really isn't available. So as a facilitator, as a conversationalist, as a Feng shui artist even, right? Because still it's all energy. What do you think are the ways that others might be able to just take note of that situation and maybe be more present themselves to recognize, acknowledge, and not necessarily call out, but that's essentially what you're doing. It's like, wait a minute, we're going the wrong direction here. We need to get back into our being instead of our doing, because we've lost sight of who each of us are and what we mean to each other.
Right.
We're not just an ends to a mean, or a
Oh,
means to an end. Right.
well, absolutely. Well, you know, it's interesting. I guess I'll just use another example from my life. I was holding every Wednesday from 5 to 6. I join other friends and we hold love signs and smile and wave to neighbors driving through the main intersection of the town in which I
What a
live.
hippie thing to do.
Oh, it's really beautiful. And early on, because we started in September of 2018, and there was a couple and they had many children, and they came over in such a fury, Zen. And both the husband went right up to my friend and her sign, and the wife happened to come up to me and, you know, just screaming, there is no love in the world, and the spit's hitting my face. And I mean, she's like right up in my energy field.
Right.
And I stood stock still. I you know, again, you know, aligned with that inner energy awareness. And what I chose to do is to, I know this sounds really odd, but I basically agreed with her, because she started saying things like, you know, people stealing other people's homes, that's not love. And I was like, you're right, that's not. And that, you know, and Jesus wouldn't, you know, you're right, Jesus wouldn't have taught that, you're right. And then da, 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 da. And I was like, yeah, that's another example. And I had a softer voice. My demeanor was not submissive. I was standing confident and strong from the core of me. But I also shifted my body and was kind of still outwardly focused on the cars going by, even because she was so, I don't think she could even take in, but I'm an energy presence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she slowly, ever incrementally, you know, began to calm down a tiny bit, you know, and the next one would come at me. And then I shared, oh, you know, I think actually I used an example of, you know, my own interactions with my own mother, and it was like, yeah, that wasn't okay for her. And yeah, I actually walked away from my family of origin for a decade. And, you know, so, and I noticed her children. You know, because it was like, even though I was doing this, but then I would turn back to her. And I was, you know, I widened, because here's another idea, is to widen your lens to the larger context in which an interaction is taking place, right? And she had calmed down enough in the wake of my response, to the extent that she could actually hear me. But to your point earlier, it wasn't even the words that I said. It was my energy presence, which was strong and yet soft.
Right.
My tone of voice, which again was clear and yet tender.
Yeah, you weren't confrontational.
Not at all.
And that's what they were anticipating.
I did a total Tai Chi with her. I
Yeah.
Right. But here's the interesting thing, Zen. I also didn't walk away from this woman.
Right.
I could have. I could
Well,
have,
but you weren't,
but I was,
that wasn't in your
but I
being to
was,
do though, Laura. That
no,
was
no,
just,
it wasn't.
yeah.
And you know, and the good news is I was paying enough attention, because that's the thing of the gift of self-awareness, is you're paying enough attention. I was paying enough attention that I knew she wasn't going to strike me. I knew it was just, and I had all that practice with my mom. You know, I
Right.
was like, I know this one. I got this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, from a
So you
little
had plenty
kid.
of prep
So,
work, and you were able to
yeah.
just kind of manage that,
And
soften,
she, yeah.
and
And
you
then she,
didn't, and this is one of the things you probably recognize too. When somebody's angry, it's not at you,
no.
it's at something else, and they just need to vent. And as long as you
Yeah.
don't take it personally and
Right.
you agree with them or whatever,
Just,
not
yep.
necessarily whatever,
You
but
do,
as
or
long as you
yeah.
don't react and
Yeah.
return the energy in kind, then
Yeah.
it dissipates, and they
Yes.
themselves will soften. Now,
Yeah. And
in
she turned away to finish the story. She did turn away, and I said, and I asked her very intentionally, I said, did you feel heard? And she said, yes, I did. You know, kind of like that. And I was like,
right, and that's oftentimes all people are looking for, is just to acknowledge being heard. Now,
ah,
I've often wondered, and I'm the kind of guy that I'll bring stuff up in meetings. It's like, wait a minute, something just doesn't feel right here. And I'll be the weird one. I don't care.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, so I'm feeling this, and I'm wondering about this, and I noticed this.
Yep.
And is there a possibility we might be able to that, right? And just opening things up and questioning, and it diffuses the energy, first of all, but that's after allowing folks to be heard and acknowledging, the act of listening, right? Here's
Yes.
what I just thought, I
Huge.
think I hear you saying, and
Huge.
that
Yes.
gives them the opportunity to recognize that, okay, I am being listened to because I'm being responded to in this
Ah,
way. Um,
oh,
and it just feels good, even though when you feel like crap, right?
right, right. Well, and honestly, the times in my life, right, that I've looked like the woman who approached me, right, and somebody has just been like so gentle and so compassionate with me and going, Laura, I really get how frustrated and enraged you are. I get it. And I mean, I even have a friend that I was just like, okay, I'm going to say a lot of salty words right now because I am furious. Now I had an awareness, right?
Yeah.
And then, my friend was laughing on the other end of the phone going, wow, you sound like Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation. And then I'm laughing, right?
Sure,
So I
sure,
kind of
sure.
go from this to laughing at myself, right? But being heard and having someone listen with their whole self, like with rapt attention, even when somebody is in that state, it can completely shift the energy of an entire room if one person does that. One person,
Absolutely.
oh my God, one person demonstrating what I'm going to describe as emotional maturity.
Intelligence.
Well, emotional intelligence, but applying it and showing it as emotional maturity and social maturity, right?
Melissa would call that psychological
Man,
safety and
yes,
intellectual humility.
yes, exactly. And as soon as somebody in the room has the wherewithal to engage all those ideas or whatever ideas work for them to go to the pause or go to their own neutral inside, or just be that witness consciousness
Mhm.
in the room full of fiery individuals.
Somebody
Man,
needs to, and why
yes,
not?
right. Well,
What's it gonna do
right.
to step up and experiment?
Yes, exactly, exactly. Because it makes me think of, oh my gosh, the amazing story of the man who interacted with the student. I shouldn't take his story, but it was so phenomenal because this, because he said, if you have a child or a teenager in a high school classroom and the teacher, both, nobody's being an adult. Nobody's demonstrating that emotional maturity.
Oh, I've got a story that this is.
God, right? And so, well, and that was true of me in parenting.
Yeah.
I needed to show up emotionally regulated. Now I needed support because
most adults are just kids in an adult body because they haven't got the emotional maturation yet.
Exactly. They're like, and I don't mean any disrespect to any of us because I did.
No, it's just it's not disrespectful. It's just honoring what is.
Yeah, I behaved like an emotional 3-year-old, terrified and like a cornered animal with my own little children until I stopped and saw myself and got in with professional therapists and healers to help me, but I saw it, and I was.
And it is okay to ask for help.
Yes, because there's so many modalities now out there, Zen, to help with trauma. Oh my gosh. And I'm so grateful that you and I are able to, touch on it and have the conversation. I knew you had an amazing conversation with Mark O'Brien, about his experiences. And because it's like being able to talk openly about what happened to you, but then how do you go about healing it? And getting that regulation, especially if there's been trauma. And now I would argue we've got collective trauma, right? I mean, tornadoes, and
global
blizzards, and
trauma.
Well, global trauma. I mean, there's a pandemic, and however many people have died of cancer.
We don't know what.
Of whatever it is, but there are dead bodies everywhere. So that's just real. Yeah. So, wow. Right. So how do we heal and come through and out on the other side of this? And of course, be like, I love how you say, be the dream. And it's Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. Right. And so for each individual, and that's why I love this conversation, because it's like, oh God, if there's one little nugget out there that inspired somebody, I'm so excited, because, the more each of us individually can look at these things and begin to heal and begin to regulate our nervous systems and pay attention from such a wider view. So for instance, I know that I walk through the world, and if there's a car coming at me, right,
get out of the way,
I'm gonna get out of the road. I mean, I was out on my bicycle just recently because, of course, here it is, Thanksgiving, and I'm riding my bicycle. But I was, because it was warm enough, and here comes the car barreling, so close to me, and I swerved my bike over, and my body still responded. I couldn't visually see it coming, but I heard it, and now I know next time to really get off the road, because this vehicle came so close, and I don't want to go. That's not the way I want to go. I might go that way, but
you like rushes, but not that kind.
Right. I would. Yeah, I prefer to be around for a little while longer. There's a lot of love to give to the world. So yeah.
In talking with, because we're kind of talking about nonviolent communication too.
Yes, most definitely.
And there's a lot of training on that. Yes. One of the things that I had, you were talking about teacher and student. I taught high school for a number of years, and part of that was special education with learning disabled and emotionally handicapped kids. Yeah. And I had one of my students, I don't know if you remember the Milton the Monster cartoon. And so it's Milton the Monster, he's got like a stovepipe head, and when he would blow his top, he would get upset and actually blow his top. Kind of like that just happened, right? When I went green.
Yeah, right. You went to the ocean.
Yeah, that was funny. So he was a desk thrower, and I was told about this before I took over the class, and one day, and he was usually just a nice, kind kid, learning disabled, of course, emotionally handicapped.
Yeah.
And he was trying to do something. I knew he was trying to do it for me. And he was getting frustrated because he couldn't do what he thought I wanted him to do.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in his just classroom, it wasn't behavior, it was actually some math, I think. And he just was having challenge, and he stood up and he started huffing and puffing. And then it looked like he was going to pick up a desk, right? He started to reach for it. And I'm standing there, and he's 6'4", 6'5", and I'm 5'8". So he was weighing, he was like completely towering over me. And I knew that there was nothing I could do if he decided to go, aberrant behavior, whatever that might be, right? And so I'm standing with my arms open, palms toward him, and like, Michael, I understand that you really want to do this, and you're frustrated because you're trying to perform like you think I want you to, and it's okay. I just see you trying, and that's good enough. You're fine. I'm on your side. Things are, and then he started, his breath relaxed, his body relaxed, and I was thinking to myself, whew, I avoided that one.
Right.
And
the power of de-escalation. Oh,
and he was one of those kids that because of that, then that created a deeper emotional bond between us. And, that's how those kinds of things work.
Oh,
whether they're with children or adults, either one.
Oh, that's right. Because here's what I feel like we need so badly right now is to stay connected. I mean, not obviously to somebody who is gonna shoot you with a gun. I don't mean that. I mean, obviously get to safety, but in that kind of situation where you're describing, right, where you knew enough about this student that your response made all the difference, and it was that energy response of calm, of understanding his frustration, of really getting where he was coming from, and
I have a tendency to step in and want to diffuse things.
Allowed him to soften and yet stay connected. Because here we are again. People want to be seen, heard, and valued, Zen, and then to do that with ourselves. We need to see, hear, and value ourselves, as well as that higher consciousness or true self or essential self, or I call it my inner quiet Charlotte, right?
Right.
And have that, emotional maturity and social maturity take over and kind of lead from there in any conversation, which is I don't know if you're familiar with Tai Chi, but I love Tai Chi.
Oh, I am. I used to practice
it's like,
it's so much
push
fun.
hands, right? And because even in push hands, it's about you're still connected.
Mm-hmm.
You're staying connected to this human being, and you're wanting to understand and make a difference.
I have a friend that's
for their own growth and evolution, right?
Yeah.
Because I think you said it a while ago that it feels better.
It does.
It's this direction. It feels better not being resentful. It feels better to be in this lively, inspiring conversation with you. It just does, right?
Absolutely.
Right? And rather than being like critical and judgmental and annoyed.
Well, and when you're in the open, conversant, fun place, ideas, new information. This is where we're talking about empathic and generative conversations.
Yes.
If you're closed up, if you're afraid, if you're all restricted,
right,
then things can't come through. You're not in a generative place at all. You're in a shutdown place, and you're going to deny everything that's around you. But when you're able to be present, open, maybe even somewhat fearless,
Yeah.
you know, because you know nothing outside of you is really threatening to the point where it's going to affect your inside. And
Yeah.
it's your choice as to where you're at inside, no matter what's going on outside
Yes.
of you.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the challenge that we face, especially today, in my opinion, because we are being pummeled with this, I'll just call it a fallacious narrative, that we ought to be afraid of each other.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah. I mean, fear's gone rampant.
So it
Yes.
is extremely important that we listen to ourselves, that we practice what we're talking about, that we're
Yes.
being
Yeah.
examples, that we can have
Yeah.
conversations and show, well, you know, when I experienced this, I did this and it worked. Or I experienced
Yeah.
this and I tried that and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And you know, because this is a massive experiment of how to unify an entire planet with some kind of spiritual condition that brings us all together.
Yes, yes. Well, and to have an experience of balance and flow and harmony, and that enlivens, you know, that sustains us. I mean, well, and I hadn't heard generative. I haven't heard that word in a long time, and I love it because, you know, I now can say I have this rich experience of, you know, on my runs in the morning, or when I'm dancing, or in meditation, that creative ideas just, and the thing is about generative conversations, then it's infinite. I mean, it's just like, um, you can't, there's no lid.
No.
It just, to have, you have this new idea and this another new idea, and
Yeah.
then
What
another
if,
one
what
comes
about,
in,
how about
and
this,
then,
you know,
and you're like, oh
yeah,
my God. And I like, it's the coolest, like I would call it heart storming, you know, or soul storming instead of just brainstorming. Because, you
right.
know, I mean, yes, they're ideas, but it's like they come from the whole mind, body, psyche, you know, this whole, what do we call it? You know,
Holistic
water,
system,
mostly water,
our
the matter,
being.
but the animated, right?
Mhm.
Because I, you know, at some point, hopefully a long time from now, you know, I will drop this packaging. I call it packaging, right? And,
Sure.
you know, and but that spirit essence, I know will continue.
Well, that's the thing. We were
That
talking earlier about
energy, that
the
energy
white
has
light
to keep
experience.
going,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you know, when we recognize it, and some of us have near death experiences or something
Yes.
similar to that. For me, mine happened when I prayed to know what truth was, and I was asked a few days later if I was willing to die for what I believed in, and I said yes. And so then the experience I had was recognizing first there is no death, because even in the white light I could still think, so I was self-aware.
Yes.
And then moving beyond that, in being surrounded by points of light, I recognize that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into those points of light, bouncing back and forth between the great light and whatever planet we're on,
Yeah.
until we get this place where we're effervescing from within
Yeah.
on a continual basis. And that's what brings that whole, not just idea, but experience of living in quantum entanglement with the unified field, that gives us, it reveals or allows us to discover our perfected form, fit, and function in the world, because then we're available to it. And it doesn't mean that we have to jettison all of our skill set that we've developed because we think, okay, now I'm going to change my life, right? You've
Right.
got that skill set for a reason, and it does allow you to take it to a new level of experience, because now you've got the foundation. It's just the fine tuning of, you know, it's like the body. We're an instrument. We just don't know how to tune it, let alone play it.
Right.
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 So now we're learning how to do that, because we've got the chakras, we've got the marmas, we've got the meridians, we've got the, you know, the three brain system, and there's all kinds of the corpus callosum and the right and left hemispheres and all
Oh,
this kinds of stuff that give
cortex.
us the opportunity to move up in our understanding. It's like we said earlier, you know, a friend of mine, Swami Bhyanananda, calls it the upwising.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And he's kind of a cosmic comedian. So he takes his, you know, this kind of Punch and Judy view of reality, and he brings these comedic responses in from a new age perspective, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny and it's lively, but it also makes you go, huh, that's interesting, because you know, we never think about things that way because
Yeah.
we're in this tunnel vision or blinder condition from our past, from our genes, from the programming that we've had around us. And we're in the process of breaking free of all of that and looking at how we can create empathic and generative conversations with each other that brings that raises the tide, right? And
Yes.
it
Yes.
and all the boats raise because of
Yeah.
that.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It almost makes me think of those individuals who can walk in the room and just the energy of the entire room shifts and calms, and the person doesn't even have to say a word. I remember a
I
friend.
do that. I've
I
experienced it.
I believe that, and it reminds me of a friend of mine told me about. I don't remember the woman's name, but she said, you know, she went to hear this woman speak, and all the woman did was stand silently and look into the eyes of every person that she could make eye contact with, and it never uttered a word, and people were weeping. I mean, just she just began to weep
I
because
forget the guy's name from
just
Europe
because
that
it was
used to, yeah.
love. I mean, love was all that filled the room. She was so moved by that experience. Wow.
And it does feel great, you know, and even and for those of who are listening that are speakers or presenter, try that. Try standing in front of the room and just being quiet and looking around and establish eye contact with everyone that you can before you utter a word. I will guarantee you, you will deliver the best presentation of your life by doing so, because now you've connected with everybody in the audience, and that energy is also present in you because of the exercise that you just did.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
everything's kind of green today.
Yeah, I'm noticing as we shifted into this,
It's
you know,
funny.
kind of
I've
like it's
never
just
had to
your
do this
background keeps
before.
flipping
So
back and forth.
yeah, the guys are kind of being
That
friendly
sounds
and
so good.
playful and working with my attachment to having the appropriate background, right?
Right? I know.
It's
Oh
so
my
funny.
goodness.
So Laura, we're kind of coming close to time.
Yeah.
If there were a nugget that you could offer our audience that they could take with them and just contemplate and practice, what might that be?
Wow. Well, it could certainly be any time you can to shift to that neutral place. You know, to take that deep breath. If you notice in your own body, you know, things building up, or frustration, or you know, so and to work to
You're
catch
feeling kind
yourself,
of green in the moment.
right? And to kind of catch yourself before words come out that you just can't pull back. And I would say this especially with anyone who happens to be with children, because it's amazing how one phrase of that comes in anger can just become this, it's called an interject inside a child's mind
Mm-hmm.
for way too long. You know, so yeah, and you know, like pattern interrupt that, and that, you know, soften the knees, soften your eyes, that tongue on the roof of the mouth, deep, deep breaths, feel your feet. I know that was a lot. That wasn't necessarily one idea. Breathe.
Yeah. Breathe. That's probably the most
Deep
important.
breathe. I guess that would be another one. And yet it's amazing. You know, I believe Thich Nhat Hanh did an 1.5-hour talk on breathing, and I was like, man, that must have been just amazing.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
Amazing man, he is.
yeah.
Amazing people we all are.
Oh, yes.
When we give ourselves a chance to be,
yeah,
and allow that to take place, honor that in others, and invite it.
Yeah.
Because we don't like to be angry. I can't imagine that, you know, when you compare being angry or being happy, which would you rather be? And I can't think of anybody that would choose anger.
Yeah, I know.
And yet we do.
Oh, I know. Well, because it's in that
It's pattern response.
amygdala fight, flight, freeze thing. Yep. Yeah. Well, and I think part of it too is what I discovered about it is it's a secondary emotion, and it can be a resistance to the grief, and then the love that lives even deeper than that. So when you drop beneath the anger and the fear, there's actually often a lot of grief. And then underneath the grief is a whole ton of love.
Well, and when there's an absence of love and you're not feeling love from another, then that's a reactionary spot, right? Because you're that little child, how could you not love me? Right? And yet it's so deep and so embedded and so unrecognized that the pattern comes up and happens before we can do anything about it. And then we regret.
That's right. Well, and then to, I guess work with the cultivating what I would call that inner fly on the wall, that part of you that is the experiencer of your experiences, because that part of you can connect to with love and compassion and be that adult self. And you can even be that adult self for all your inner children. I do that pretty regularly, anytime I call them my young ones. Anytime one of those young ones kind of shows up, not too much lately, but I now know to just meet them and greet them just like I would you or any other human being, hopefully, right? And allow that part of me to speak what they need to say and just simply listen.
Now, of course, here we are. We're not so dissimilar in age, and so we've had a lifetime to build this understanding and activity and response to the things that we encounter. And so hopefully, we're being heard by some younger folk that can at least understand maybe there's a little wisdom and maybe try things and avoid situations that are unnecessary in their own lives.
Yeah. Oh, well, see, and that's a permission slip I've given myself lately, now that you mentioned that, of in my own situation to move towards the good. Part of my habituated pattern was to shift and move towards drama and trauma. And now I'm like, if that's happening, I just shift away. I feel like I've become a hummingbird, and it's actually really good for my health and my mental emotional health. So for instance, I'm on a news fast. I'm not under a rock, but it allows me to stay aligned with my purpose, my deepest values, the opportunities that come my way, and that deep inner voice of creative energy that continues pouring out of me in poetry and prose and essays and blogs. And I've just been so honored to kind of stop putting my foot over that hose, right? You know,
Right,
like
right.
the
Well, we're going to open the hose up a little bit because I am going to share the links to your books and your blogs and
Oh, thank you. Thank
articles
you so much.
below the video, so
Yeah,
our
thank you.
listeners can find them. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, Laura.
Oh my gosh, it
I'm
was
very
rich,
appreciative of
and
it.
oh my gosh, it was so rich and meaningful, and oh, we went a lot of beautiful places then, I'm just truly honored to have had the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me to be with you in the space, and a generative and inspired conversation that hopefully is valuable to many of your listeners.
It will be, even though the space has been a little argumentative.
Right, I know. And then it's just getting dark outside here. The full moon comes, I think, tomorrow. So
It was beautiful last night. Well, thanks again so much, Laura, and I
yes.
really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Zen.
And namaste and in la catch. Thank you for tuning into this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and we'll see you next time.